Rahim had always lived a quiet life, the kind of life where each day looked almost the same as the one before it. He woke up early in the morning, long before the sun showed its first light. The forest outside his wooden cabin was usually covered with soft mist at that hour. The tall trees stood silently like old friends waiting for him, and the crisp air carried the gentle smell of pine. Rahim loved this time of day more than any other. It was calm, peaceful, and completely his own. He stepped outside every morning with a small metal flask of warm tea in one hand and his old lantern in the other. Even though he knew every inch of the forest by heart, he liked carrying the lantern out of habit. He had lived here for many years, and nothing in the forest surprised him anymore. He knew which tree bent slightly to the left, which rock had a tiny crack running across it, and which path led to the small stream where deer often came to drink water. Rahim worked as a forester, a job he never planned to take but eventually grew to love more than anything. His duty was to make sure the forest remained healthy and safe. Some days, he checked for broken branches that could fall on the path. Other days, he inspected the wooden fences made to protect small plants from animals. At times, he simply walked around, observing how the trees were growing or whether the birds seemed quieter or louder than usual. People in the nearby village respected him. They knew him as the man who loved the forest more than anything else. He did not talk much, but whenever he did, his words were calm and honest. Children in the village sometimes waved at him, but he usually just gave them a small smile and continued with his work. It wasn't that he disliked people. He simply didn't know how to be close to them anymore. Years ago, Rahim had been different. He used to talk more, laugh more, and even had dreams of living with a family of his own. But life didn't turn out the way he expected. Some relationships broke slowly, others ended suddenly. Every time something went wrong, Rahim quietly stepped back from people and spent more time in the forest. Eventually, the silence of the trees became more comforting than the noise of people. And with time, he accepted that loneliness was easier than disappointment. Yet, despite living alone, Rahim never allowed sadness to fill his days. His heart found peace in simple things. When he saw a new flower blooming between two rocks, he felt happy. When he found a baby bird learning to fly, he quietly watched from a distance, hoping it wouldn't fall. He cared for the small things around him, as if they were pieces of his own life. His cabin was small but warm. It had wooden walls, a stone fireplace, and a single window facing the forest. Inside, everything was neatly arranged. Rahim liked keeping things simple. There were only a few items: a wooden table, one chair, a shelf with old books, and a bed covered with a handmade blanket. He cooked simple meals like rice, beans, or soup. He never felt the need for anything fancy. Evenings were the quietest time for him. After a long day in the forest, he sat near his fireplace with a cup of warm tea. Sometimes, he read old books about trees or nature. Other times, he simply listened to the soft crackling of the fire. Outside, the night animals made their gentle sounds, and Rahim felt comfort in knowing he wasn't truly alone. The forest was always alive, but deep down, somewhere in a corner of his heart, there was still a small feeling he couldn't ignore, an empty space he had learned to live with. It was the feeling of having no one to talk to, no one to share meals with, and no one waiting for him at the end of the day. He never admitted it to himself, but the silence sometimes felt heavier than he wanted to accept. On some days, he saw families from the village walking together on the forest path. Parents held their children's hands, guiding them safely. Rahim watched them from a distance. He didn't feel jealous, but he did feel something soft inside him. Maybe it was longing. Maybe it was a reminder of a dream he once had. He didn't try to understand it. He simply let the feeling pass, like a gentle breeze. Although Rahim preferred solitude, he wasn't unfriendly. Occasionally, travelers or hikers lost their way and ended up near his cabin. He always helped them with directions, sometimes offering them water or a warm place to rest. But he never encouraged long conversations. People rarely stayed for more than a few minutes, and Rahim felt thankful for the brief company without wanting more. The villagers often said that Rahim was a good man with a good heart, but he had chosen a life far away from everyone else. They admired him, But they also wondered how he managed to live alone for so long without feeling lonely. Rahim never told them that he did sometimes feel lonely, but he had grown used to it. Everything in Rahim's life moved slowly and peacefully. He never rushed, never argued, and never worried about things he couldn't control. His days flowed like the steady stream in the forest, calm, predictable, and gentle. He believed he would continue living like this forever. But life has its own plans, often appearing without a sound, changing everything before a person even realizes it. One evening, the sky turned darker than usual. Thick clouds gathered and covered the sun much earlier than expected. The wind began to blow strongly, and the forest leaves rustled loudly. Rahim stepped out to secure the few loose wooden planks near his cabin before the rain began. He looked at the sky and felt that a heavy storm was coming. He had seen many storms in his life, but something about this one felt different, stronger, louder, more urgent. As he walked toward the edge of the forest, he heard something unusual. It wasn't the sound of trees moving or branches falling. It was something softer, something human. He paused and listened carefully. Through the rushing wind and distant thunder, Rahim could hear worried voices. They were faint, but they were real. He followed the sound until he reached the narrow road near the forest entrance. That's when he saw them, a woman standing beside a broken vehicle, trying to comfort two young children while shielding them from the wind. Rahim stood still for a moment, surprised. He wasn't used to seeing people here during storms, and certainly not a woman with children. He noticed the fear in their eyes, the worry on the mother's face, and the way the children clung to her clothing. Rahim did not know yet that this simple moment, this unexpected encounter, was going to change the quiet rhythm of his life forever. He didn't know that the people standing before him would one day become the ones who filled the empty space in his heart. He didn't know that the silence he had lived with for so long was about to be replaced with laughter, warmth, and belonging. All he knew at that moment was that they needed help, and despite being a solitary man, he could not walk away from someone in need. And so, without saying much, he stepped forward. The sound of the wind grew louder as Rahim stepped closer to the broken vehicle. The trees behind him swayed strongly, and dry leaves rushed across the road like little brown birds trying to escape the storm. The woman standing beside the vehicle held her children close, trying her best to protect them from the cold air. Her face was filled with worry, but she stood steady, clearly trying not to show her fear. Rahim approached slowly so he wouldn't startle them. The children noticed him first. One of them, a boy around 8 years old, pointed toward Rahim and tugged at his mother's sleeve. The woman turned, and her anxious eyes softened slightly when she saw a gentle-looking man, instead of a stranger with harsh intentions. Her clothes were a bit dusty from the long journey, and her hair, though tied neatly, blew across her face in the heavy wind. The children clung to her sides tightly. The boy held a small backpack, while the younger girl had a rag doll pressed close to her chest. Everything about them showed that they had been traveling for long hours without rest. Rahim took one more step forward and spoke in his calm, low voice. "The storm will get worse," he said. "You shouldn't stay on the road." The woman nodded nervously. "Our vehicle suddenly stopped. I tried turning it on, but it won't move even an inch." Rahim glanced at the old vehicle. The tires were muddy, the engine cover was slightly open, and a small trail of smoke rose from inside. It was clear that the problem was not simple. Repairing it in the middle of a storm would be impossible. "You and the children need shelter," Rahim said quietly. "My cabin is close. You can stay there until the storm passes." The woman hesitated for a moment, perhaps unsure if she should trust someone she had never met before. But another strong gust of wind convinced her. The children trembled slightly, and she pulled them closer. "Thank you," she said after a moment. I truly appreciate it." Rahim nodded without saying more. He was not a man of many words, but the sincerity in his tone was enough to comfort her. He guided them toward his cabin. The rain had not begun yet, but the sky grumbled with deep thunder, warning that it would fall any minute. The woman held her children's hands tightly as they walked behind Rahim. Though he looked quiet and serious, there was something safe about walking near him. His steps were firm, and he kept glancing back to make sure the children were not falling behind. "What is your name?" the boy asked in a small voice. "Rahim," he replied. The boy nodded as though trying to memorize it, and Rahim found himself offering a small smile. It felt unusual, and yet it came naturally. "And yours?" Rahim asked, surprising himself. "I'm Sammy," the boy said proudly. "And this is my sister, Hania." The little girl peeked at Rahim shyly before hiding her face again. Rahim then looked toward their mother. "And you?" "Isla," she said softly. Rahim repeated the name in his mind. It was a calm, graceful name, and it suited her gentle appearance. When they reached the cabin, the rain finally began to fall, first in small drops, then in heavy sheets that made the forest echo with their sound. Rahim quickly opened the door and let Isla and the children step inside first. The warmth of the room was a welcome change from the cold wind outside. The children looked around curiously. The cabin was simple but comforting, with its wooden walls, soft, dim light, and neat arrangement. Hania walked closer to the fireplace, staring at it with wide eyes as if she had stepped into a tiny wonderland. "You can sit," Rahim said, slightly unsure of how to host guests, since he rarely had any. Isla helped her children settle on the wooden bench near the fireplace. Rahim hurried to add more firewood so the cabin would warm up faster. The flames rose gently, filling the room with a soft orange glow. "Let me get some warm water," Rahim said, moving toward the small kitchen corner. As he heated the water, he observed Ayla from the corner of his eye. She sat quietly, calming her children with gentle words. Her voice had a soothing rhythm, something filled with patience learned through hardship. Rahim could see exhaustion on her face, deep, quiet exhaustion that came from carrying heavy responsibilities for too long. He poured warm water into cups and offered them. The children smiled gratefully and wrapped their hands around the warm cups. "Thank you, Uncle," Sammy said without hesitation. Rahim paused. He had never been called uncle before by a child. The word touched a place inside him he didn't know was still alive. He simply nodded and pretended to focus on the fireplace so his reaction wouldn't show too clearly. Ayla gave him a thankful smile. "You're very kind," she said. Rahim's eyes lowered, slightly embarrassed. "It's nothing. Anyone would help in a storm, but he knew not everyone would open their home to strangers." Still, he didn't want credit for something he felt he simply had to do. After the children warmed up, the room became filled with small movements and soft chatter. Sammy asked questions about the forest, about the birds he heard outside, and about Rahim's work. Hania wandered around the cabin, touching the edges of the wooden furniture, as if exploring a hidden world. Rahim answered their questions in his simple and gentle way. The children's presence slowly filled the quiet space he had lived in for years. Their soft voices seemed to lighten the air around him. Isla watched all of this with a tender expression. Seeing her children smile again made her eyes shine with relief. For the first time in days, she felt safe. Rahim noticed her silence and asked, "How long have you been traveling?" Isla took a small breath before answering. "For many days. Ever since we left our old home." Her voice wavered slightly, and Rahim didn't ask further. He understood that every person carried a story, and some stories were too heavy to share with a stranger. Instead, he gave her time and space. "You can stay here until the storm stops," he said gently. "There is no hurry." Ayla nodded gratefully. She looked around the cabin and then at Rahim. "Thank you for trusting us," she murmured. Rahim shook his head. "It's you who trusted me first." A brief silence followed, soft but meaningful. Outside, the storm raged loudly. But inside the cabin, a strange, quiet warmth settled, as if the forest itself had made room for this unexpected meeting. Later, Rahim cooked a simple meal: rice, vegetables, and warm soup. The smell filled the cabin, making it feel even more like a home. He watched the children eat happily and felt something stir inside him. It was not loneliness this time. It was something gentle, something new, something he couldn't yet name. When the children finished eating, they sat near the fireplace and slowly drifted to sleep, leaning on each other. Isla carefully placed a blanket over them. She sat nearby, her face relaxed for the first time in a long while. Rahim looked at her quietly. She had a courage he respected. Traveling alone with 2 children, facing the unknown, yet still holding herself together, that strength touched him. "I hope the storm ends by morning," she said softly. Rahim nodded. "Even if it doesn't, you can stay." "There is no trouble." Ayla's eyes softened with gratitude. "You don't know how much that means to me." Rahim did not respond. Instead, he looked into the fire, wondering why he felt something warming inside him, something beyond the heat of the flames. Life had brought these strangers to his door for a reason he didn't yet understand. But as he watched the small family resting peacefully in his cabin, he sensed that his quiet life was beginning to change. He didn't know how or how much, but he knew this. Their arrival was not a simple accident. It was the beginning of something he never saw coming. The next morning arrived quietly, with soft sunlight peeking through the clouds. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the forest smelling fresh and clean, as if it had been washed by nature itself. Birds began to chirp again, and the gentle breeze carried the sound of leaves brushing against each other. It was a peaceful morning, the kind that made life feel calm and hopeful. Inside the cabin, the children were the first to wake up. Sammy stretched his arms and rubbed his eyes, while little Hania sleepily clung to her blanket. When they realized where they were, they looked around with excitement instead of fear. To them, Rahim's cabin felt like an adventure, a place full of new things to explore. Rahim was already awake. He stood outside, cutting wood for the fire, unaware that the children were watching him from the window with curious eyes. They whispered to each other, wondering how someone could live alone in such a quiet place, and whether he ever felt scared at night. Isla woke up shortly after and smiled softly when she saw her children's interest in Rahim. She stepped outside the cabin, walked a few small steps toward him, and greeted him. "Good morning," she said gently. Rahim turned and nodded with his usual calm expression. "Good morning. I didn't want to wake you. You all seem tired." "We were," Ayla admitted. "But your home gave us the rest we needed." Her words made something warm move through Rahim's chest. He didn't reply, but she could see a small change in his eyes, almost like gratitude. The children soon ran outside to join them. Sami asked loudly, "Uncle Rahim, can we help you with the wood?" Rahim blinked in surprise. He wasn't used to help, especially from children. But their enthusiasm made him smile faintly. "You can carry the smaller pieces," he said. Sami proudly lifted one piece of wood that wasn't too heavy. Hania picked up a tiny branch and held it close to her chest, as if contributing something very important. Watching them made Rahim's quiet morning feel unexpectedly lively. After the work was done, Rahim prepared a simple breakfast: warm porridge, bread, and honey. The children sat eagerly at the table, and Isla helped Rahim serve the meal. It was the first time she moved around his kitchen area, and Rahim felt strangely aware of the presence of another adult in his usually silent home. The children chatted happily while eating. Sami talked about the doll he made from leaves the previous night. Hania explained how she wanted to live in a forest so she could play with rabbits every day. Their innocent excitement filled the cabin with a warmth that Rahim hadn't felt in years. Isla watched Rahim quietly. She noticed that he listened to every word her children said, even if he didn't show much expression. There was a gentleness in his silence, a kindness in the way he watched them. It made her feel safe. It made her feel that she had brought her children to the right place. After breakfast, Sami asked Rahim if he could see the forest. Rahim hesitated at first. He usually worked alone and didn't want the children to get hurt. But the hope in their eyes was too bright to ignore. "All right," he said finally, "but stay close to me." The children cheered as though he had agreed to take them on a grand journey. Rahim led them through the forest, showing them tiny wonders he had never shown anyone else. He pointed out the tree with a bent trunk that looked like it was bowing. He showed them the smooth stones near the stream and explained how water had shaped them over many years. He showed them animal footprints in the mud and taught them how to tell whether they belonged to a deer or a fox. Sami listened with great interest, asking endless questions. Hania walked beside Rahim, holding his fingers gently, trusting him even though she had only met him the day before. Isla followed behind them, watching everything with a soft smile. She had not seen her children laugh this freely since before her husband's passing. Their spirits seemed lighter in the forest, and Rahim's quiet presence made them feel safe. After walking for some time, they reached a small clearing where sunlight fell through the trees like golden ribbons. The children ran around, chasing butterflies and collecting small flowers. Rahim watched from a distance. The sight filled him with a feeling he couldn't quite name, something peaceful, yet unfamiliar. Isla stepped beside him and spoke quietly. "Thank you for doing this for them." "I didn't do much," Rahim answered. "You did," she insisted softly. "You gave them a moment of happiness. That means more than you know." Rahim looked at her for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. He wasn't used to praise. He wasn't used to someone noticing his small kindnesses. It made him feel something he hadn't felt in a very long time. When they returned to the cabin, Rahim repaired the loose hinges on the door, while Sammy watched him with fascination. Hania followed Isla around, helping her fold the blankets. The cabin began to look less like a place of solitude and more like a small, warm home filled with gentle movement. Later that day, Ayla stepped outside with a quiet sigh. Rahim noticed and walked toward her. "You seem worried," he said. She smiled weakly. "Just thinking about what to do next." "The vehicle still isn't working." Rahim nodded. He understood that traveling with children and no proper help was difficult. "I can try to look at it again," he offered. Isla looked relieved. "Thank you. I don't want to trouble you." "It's no trouble," Rahim said simply. They walked back to the road together. Rahim checked the vehicle carefully. It needed new parts. Ones that could only be found in the village, which was several miles away. "It will take time to fix," he said. Isla looked at her children playing nearby, their laughter echoing softly. She already knew what Rahim was going to say before he said it. "You can stay here until it's repaired," he offered in his quiet voice. Ayla met his eyes. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "You and the children are safe here." That simple sentence held more meaning than he realized. To a woman who had been moving from one uncertain place to another, a promise of safety was everything. The next several days passed gently, each one bringing small moments that slowly softened Rahim's life. Sammy followed Rahim around, asking him about tools, trees, and the names of different birds. Rahim patiently answered, even though he wasn't used to constant conversation. Hania liked to sit near Rahim while he worked, humming softly to herself. Sometimes she handed him small things like nails or a piece of cloth, thinking she was helping. Rahim always thanked her, even when the task didn't really need help. Isla cleaned the cabin, cooked meals, and made the place feel brighter. She added small touches, a clean cloth on the table, fresh flowers in a jar, and neatly folded blankets. Her presence made the cabin feel less like a place of survival and more like a place of living. Rahim found himself noticing the difference. The cabin felt warmer. The silence felt softer. And his heart felt fuller. At night, the children fell asleep peacefully, something Ayla had prayed for. Rahim would sit quietly by the fire, listening to the soft sounds of their breathing. The cabin no longer echoed with emptiness. Ayla sometimes sat near him after the children slept. They didn't talk much, but the silence they shared was comfortable. Some nights, she told him small pieces of her story, not the painful parts, but the parts she could speak of without breaking. Rahim listened with quiet understanding, never asking for more than she offered. Slowly, their lives began to intertwine in ways none of them had expected. The children looked to Rahim with trust. Ayla looked to him with gratitude, and Rahim found himself looking at them with a kind of affection he had long forgotten. He didn't know what this feeling meant yet. He didn't try to name it. He only knew that the forest felt different with them, brighter, warmer, alive. And though he didn't say it out loud, he had already begun to hope something he never imagined he would hope for again. That maybe, just maybe, they would stay a little longer. The days passed more quickly than anyone expected. What was supposed to be only a short stay had quietly stretched into a week. Rahim repaired small things in the cabin, Isla cooked warm meals, and the children filled the forest with their laughter. But time, no matter how gentle it feels, always moves forward, and eventually, the day arrived when Isla's vehicle was finally fixed. Early that morning, Rahim stepped outside to check the engine one last time. The sun had just risen, painting the sky with soft colors of gold and pink. Birds hopped along the branches as if celebrating the new day. Yet, for Rahim, the morning felt heavier than usual. The engine started smoothly now. The sound felt like a reminder, clear and sharp, that Isla and the children could leave at any moment. He stood silently, listening to the steady hum of the vehicle. He should have felt satisfied that he had helped them, but instead he felt something tightening in his chest. Something he didn't know how to fight. When he returned to the cabin, he found Isla preparing breakfast while the children packed their small bags. Their voices were filled with excitement, but with a hint of sadness mixed in. "Uncle Rahim fixed the car," Sami announced proudly, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's good," Ayla said softly, glancing at Rahim with a grateful yet emotional expression. She tried to smile, but it was clear her heart was conflicted too. Rahim nodded. "You can leave today." Silence followed his words. Not because they didn't hear him, but because none of them wanted to hear it. Hania suddenly wrapped her arms around Rahim's leg. "We don't want to go," she said in a small, trembling voice. Ayla gently pulled her daughter back. "Hania, sweetheart, we have to continue our journey." "But why?" the little girl protested. "I like it here." Ayla exhaled slowly, her eyes glistening. "I know. I like it here too." Rahim's heart softened hearing those words, but he couldn't say anything in return. He didn't know if he had the right to ask them to stay, and so he remained silent, though inside him, a storm far stronger than the one outside was raging. After breakfast, Isla quietly helped the children gather their belongings. Sami folded his small blanket neatly. Hania hugged her doll to her chest, her eyes already filled with tears. The cabin, which had been full of life just yesterday, now felt strangely quiet and cold again. Isla stepped outside to breathe for a moment. Rahim followed her after a few minutes, unsure of what to say, but unable to stay inside either. She looked at him and gave a tired, emotional smile. "Thank you, Rahim, for everything you did. For us." "You don't need to thank me," he said softly. "Anyone would have helped." "No," Ayla said gently. "Not everyone opens their home to strangers. Not everyone shows kindness without expecting anything in return." Rahim didn't know how to respond. Her words touched him deeply, but he kept his eyes on the forest to hide the emotion in his face. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the wind rustling the leaves. "I hope your journey ahead goes smoothly," Rahim finally managed to say. Isla nodded, though her eyes clearly showed she wasn't ready to leave. "I hope so too." When the time came, Rahim helped carry their bags to the vehicle. Sami walked slowly, dragging his feet, as if hoping Rahim might tell them to stay. Hania held Rahim's hand tightly until the very end, refusing to let go. "Will we see you again?" Sami asked, his voice trembling. Rahim looked at him, his calm face struggling to hide the ache in his heart. "Maybe," he said softly. "If you ever come this way." Sami tried to smile, but the sadness was too strong. "I want to come back." Hania nodded vigorously. "Me too." Isla touched both children's shoulders gently. "Come on, we have to go." Rahim opened the door of the vehicle for them. His hands shook slightly, though he kept his expression steady. Isla stepped inside, then looked at Rahim once more. Her eyes held gratitude, sorrow, and a question she didn't dare ask. "Take care of yourself, Rahim," she said in a soft voice that carried more meaning than the words themselves. "You too," he replied, as the vehicle slowly rolled away. The children pressed their faces against the window, waving until they disappeared behind the trees. Rahim stood still, long after the sound of the engine faded. He didn't move, he didn't speak, he just watched the empty road, feeling a hollow silence settle over him. The forest seemed different now. The trees stood tall, but they no longer felt comforting. The birds sang, but their songs no longer brought peace. Rahim walked back to his cabin with slow, heavy steps. When he entered, the emptiness hit him harder than he expected. The cabin felt too quiet, too clean, too still. The blanket Hania used was folded neatly on the chair. The flour Sammy picked and placed on the table had begun to dry. Isla's gentle touch on the kitchen shelves seemed to linger in the air. Rahim sat down in his usual chair, but the silence around him felt heavier than ever before. He stared at the fireplace, remembering the laughter that once filled the room. It had only been a few days, yet their presence had turned his quiet world into something warm and alive, and now they were gone. For the first time in many years, Rahim felt truly alone. Not the peaceful solitude he was used to, but a sharp loneliness that reminded him of everything he never allowed himself to want. He went outside to distract himself with work, but even the forest couldn't comfort him the way it once did. Every corner reminded him of the children, Sami asking questions about trees, Hania humming while holding his hand. He walked to the clearing where they had played. The sunlight fell through the trees as before, but without their laughter, the place felt empty. Rahim sat on a rock and closed his eyes. He didn't cry, he hadn't cried in years, but his heart felt like it was carrying a weight too heavy for words. He realized something painful and beautiful at the same time. He had grown attached. He had let them into his life without noticing it. Their presence had awakened a part of him he thought was gone forever. As the day went on, Rahim returned to his cabin again and again, trying to adjust to the old quiet life he once loved. But every time he sat in his chair, the silence reminded him of what he had lost. Night came quickly, bringing a cold stillness. Rahim lit a fire, but the warmth did little to comfort him. He sat there, staring into the flames, thinking of Ayla's tired but hopeful smile, of Sammy's brave eyes, of Hania's small hand holding his. He knew they would continue their journey. Life would take them far away, and he would return to his solitude. Yet deep inside him, something whispered that this was not the end. Something told him their paths had crossed for a reason deeper than the storm. Something told him that this goodbye was not truly goodbye. But Rahim did not dare hope. Not yet. Not when hope had disappointed him before. Still, when he closed his eyes that night, he found himself whispering a small, quiet wish into the darkness. That they would come back. That he would see them again. That the emptiness in his cabin would not be forever. He didn't know it yet, but life had already written its own plan, and it was only waiting for the right moment to bring them back into his world. When Isla made the decision to return to the forest cabin, she did not think about what others might say or how unusual her choice was. She only thought about how peaceful her heart had felt during the time she and her children had spent there. The cabin had offered comfort when she needed it the most. It had offered safety, warmth, and a sense of calm that she had not felt since her husband's passing. Most of all, it had offered kindness, Rahim's kind nature, his gentle behavior toward her children, and the quiet care he had given without expecting anything in return. When the children realized where the road was leading, they grew excited. They pressed their faces against the window and kept asking the same question again and again. "Mama, are we going back to Uncle Rahim's house?" Ayla could hear the hope in their voices, and it made her smile softly. She simply nodded, and their cheers filled the car. Even she felt a lightness in her chest that had been missing for a long time. Rahim, at that very moment, was sitting outside his cabin, fixing a broken wooden tool. His movements were slow, almost distracted. Ever since Isla and the children had left, he had been struggling to adjust to the silence that had once been his comfort. The forest still whispered in the wind. The birds still sang at dawn, and the evenings were still painted with golden light, but nothing felt the same. He had grown used to the children's laughter. He had grown used to Isla's gentle voice. Even the simplest moments, like watching them eat breakfast or hearing their footsteps inside the cabin, had become something he missed deeply. So when he heard the sound of a car approaching, he looked up with confusion. The forest road rarely carried visitors. Then he saw Ayla's car slowly making its way around the bend. His heart skipped a beat. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but when the children stepped out, waving their hands and calling his name, he knew it was real. He stood up quickly, almost too quickly, brushing dirt off his clothes. The children ran to him and hugged him tightly. He froze for a moment, overwhelmed, then gently placed his hands on their backs. He had forgotten how good it felt to be greeted with such pure affection. Isla stepped out of the car, watching the scene with a warm, calm smile. She walked toward him, and when their eyes met, Rahim saw something he had not seen before: certainty. Not confusion, not hesitation, but certainty. "We are back," she said softly. Rahim swallowed, unsure if he had the right to ask the question forming in his heart. But Isla answered, before he could speak. "We would like to stay," she continued. "If you are comfortable with that. This place, it feels like home." Note a friend. Quote, "Note a friend. Note a friend. We would like to stay. It feels like home. Old a friend. 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 Old a friend." Her voice was honest and steady. Rahim did not speak for a few seconds. He was afraid that if he answered too quickly, she might think he had been waiting desperately. Though in reality, that was exactly how he had felt. "You are always welcome here," he finally said, his voice quiet but full of meaning. The children cheered again, as if he had just given them permission to explore a treasure chest. Ayla smiled with relief. And Rahim felt something gentle bloom in his chest, something he had not felt in years. Over the next few weeks, the cabin slowly transformed. Not in appearance, but in atmosphere. It felt more alive. It felt warm. Isla placed simple touches here and there: clean curtains that allowed soft light to enter, neatly folded blankets, small clay pots with flowers the children had picked from the forest edge. Rahim noticed these changes, but never stopped them. Instead, he found himself liking them. He also enjoyed the new routine that formed naturally. The children would wake early and greet him with energetic voices. They wanted to follow him during his forest rounds, asking endless questions about trees, animals, and the tools he used. Rahim, once a man who preferred silence, found himself explaining things in simple ways, trying to keep up with their curiosity. He was not used to having such active company, but he treasured every moment. Ayla, meanwhile, helped with cooking and organizing the cabin. She took on the responsibilities that came naturally to her, not because she felt obligated, but because she wanted to contribute to the place that was now her home. Whenever Rahim returned from the forest, he would find warm food waiting. Sometimes the children would proudly announce, "We helped," even if their help had only made the job slower or messier. But Isla never complained. She simply smiled and encouraged their enthusiasm. There were quiet moments too. Moments when Rahim and Ayla sat outside during the evenings, watching the sky turn from blue to orange to deep purple. The children would be playing nearby, their laughter echoing through the clearing, while the forest settled into its nightly calm. In these peaceful moments, Ayla and Rahim shared small stories about their pasts, their fears, and their hopes. Their conversations were not dramatic or emotional. They were slow, sincere, and gentle, like everything else between them. With time, the bond grew stronger, not rushed, not forced, but naturally, like a tree taking root and slowly growing. Rahim had never imagined himself forming such a deep connection with anyone again. Ayla had never imagined she would find comfort and stability so far from the world she once knew. Yet both of them found exactly what they needed in each other. The villagers began noticing the change too. When Rahim visited the village for supplies, he no longer walked with the same distant expression. He seemed lighter, more alive. Some villagers teased him gently, saying the forest must have finally given him company. Rahim would simply smile, a small smile, but enough to show that their words were true. One afternoon, the children asked if they could plant a small tree near the cabin. They said it would grow just like their new life. Rahim liked the idea, so the three of them dug a hole, while Ayla prepared water and soil. Together, they planted a young sapling. As the children watered it, Rahim felt something symbolic in that moment, a quiet promise of growth, stability, and new beginnings. Life settled into a rhythm that felt natural. The forest accepted Isla and the children, and they adapted easily to its peaceful environment. They learned the names of birds, the sounds of animals, and the safe paths through the woods. The children grew confident, playful, and happy. Ayla grew calmer, stronger, and more hopeful, and Rahim, once a solitary forester, now felt like a man with a purpose beyond his work. Years passed gently. The sapling they planted grew into a healthy young tree, standing tall beside the cabin. The children grew older, yet they still called Rahim uncle, though the relationship had become much deeper than that. They saw him as a guide, a protector, and someone who had filled a space in their hearts that had once been empty. Isla and Rahim's bond matured into something unspoken but understood by both. They did not rush anything. They did not need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Their connection was built on trust, kindness, and shared days in a place that healed them both. One evening, as they watched the sunset together, Isla said quietly, "I never expected our journey to lead us here." Rahim looked at her with a gentle expression and replied, "Sometimes the path we don't choose becomes the one that fits us the best." Ayla nodded, her eyes soft. "This place, and you, became our home." Rahim did not need many words. He simply answered, "And all of you became mine." The cabin, once a silent shelter in the woods, was now filled with love, laughter, and life. Rahim had found a family he never knew he needed. Isla and the children had found a safe place and a man who treated them with care and respect. Together, they created a story of quiet love and unexpected belonging, a story rooted not in grand events, but in simple moments that shaped their lives forever. If you want, I can now combine all 5 parts into one full story, or help you create a new title and new series as well.